June 4, 2015. A convoy of the Dogger Regiment is winding its way through the dense jungles of Manipur's Chandel district. They are heading back to base. Suddenly, an IED shreds the lead truck, launching it into the air. In the ensuing crossfire, 18 Indian soldiers are killed. The attackers belonged to the NSCN, a militant group operating in the northeast. After firing into the convoy, they didn't hold their ground. They immediately retreated, vanishing into the thick forests across the border into Myanmar. For years, militants exploited a glaring loophole. The India-Myanmar border is porous and unfenced. Groups could launch hit-and-run attacks and simply step back across the line, using a foreign country as a shield. Backed by heavy proxy funding and modern weapons from adversarial intelligence agencies like Pakistan's ISI and China, these groups operated under a comfortable assumption. India would issue a strong diplomatic condemnation and nothing more. The ambush proved that passive defense was failing. The unfenced border, once seen as a line of sovereignty, had become a layer of protection for the terrorists. Inside the Prime Minister's office in New Delhi, the atmosphere was thick with anger. The leadership recognized that a line had been crossed. Issuing another standard diplomatic protest was off the table. This chart shows the primary tactical dilemma. Standard military doctrine for a target this high value usually points to an airstrike, but the militant camps were embedded directly inside local civilian villages in Myanmar. Dropping bombs from fighter jets carried an unacceptable risk of civilian casualties. They needed surgical precision. Army Chief General Dalbir Singh told the room he needed exactly 3 days to mount a covert ground assault. The Prime Minister gave the green light, authorizing the Indian Army to cross an international border to hunt down the attackers. Rather than absorb the blow and respect a porous boundary, India chose offense. They were going to walk into the jungle and dismantle the threat at its source. The mission fell to Lieutenant Colonel Oscar Delta and a squad of 64 Para-Special Forces commandos. To avoid raising suspicion near the border, they disguised their approach as a routine infantry movement, riding in army trucks before slipping into the shadows. Once on foot, the physical toll was immense. 64 men had to march 40 kilometers through thick, unforgiving jungle and sharp inclines, each carrying 35 kilos of heavy weaponry and gear on their backs. Deep in the foliage, they hit a critical snag. The commandos stumbled across 5 armed locals carrying large monitor lizards. They were Burmese hunters. Delta faced a rapid calculation. Eliminating innocent civilians went against everything the Indian Army stood for, but letting them walk away meant risking that they might alert the militant camps. Delta chose a middle path. He ordered his men to take the hunters captive and bring them along for the march. Getting to the target required more than physical endurance. Delta's split-second moral calculations kept the mission intact and prevented the entire operation from collapsing into a war crime. By the afternoon, the punishing June heat triggered a second crisis. The squad completely ran out of water. Instead of halting, Delta used it as fuel. He told his commandos that if they were thirsty, they'd have to raid the enemy's camp and drink their supplies. Under the cover of darkness, the Para-SF reached the ridge overlooking their target. Switching on their thermal imagers, they looked down into the valley and spotted the militants moving around the 3 camp clusters. The initial plan was a night ambush, but the militants were heavily intoxicated. Drunk, armed, and wandering erratically while firing into the air, they made a coordinated stealth approach nearly impossible without losing the element of surprise. Delta made a massive tactical audible on the spot. He ordered his men to hold their positions and wait in absolute silence. He knew that by 5 a.m. the erratic patrols would end, and the militants would all gather in one predictable location to prepare breakfast. As dawn approached, the commandos crept into a semicircle around the camp. At 5 a.m., 2 rockets obliterated the sentry posts. In the ensuing 45 minutes, they rained down 15,000 rounds of ammunition, completely overwhelming the militants. The speed and volume of the fire were so intense that the militants never even had a chance to pick up their weapons. By waiting hours in the dark for the perfect window and executing the strike with absolute ferocity, the squad completely leveled the camps. Over 50 militants were killed, and not a single Indian commando suffered so much as a scratch. With the targets destroyed, Delta ordered his men to pull out. Before disappearing back into the jungle, they released the 5 captive Burmese hunters. To compensate them for their forced cooperation, Delta handed each hunter 5,000 rupees in cash. By 3 p.m., exhausted, dehydrated, and covered in mud, the 64 commandos crossed back over the border. Reaching the first Indian village, Delta kept his promise. He found a local shop, bought out their entire stock of Myanmar beer, and the squad finally took a breath to celebrate their survival. From a satellite phone, a short, heavily anticipated message was beamed back to General Dalbir Singh and the leadership waiting in New Delhi. Mission accomplished. The political response was swift. Shortly after the troops were safe, the Indian government held a press conference to publicly declare they had crossed an international border to kill terrorists, the first time the state had openly acknowledged such a move. Operation Sunrise served a dual purpose. It settled the score for the 18 soldiers lost in Manipur, but it also sent a clear message. The long-standing rule that a porous border provided immunity was dead. If you strike, the line on the map will no longer protect you.